Welcome everyone to ALS MND Connect 2022. It's my privilege to introduce you to the moderators this year, who will in turn introduce you to our presenters. And just a little bit of background about ALS MND Connect. The idea behind this portion of the conference, which we've been doing for many, many years, is to tap into the leading research experts and what's happening around the world on the forefront of research. And we have dedicated some time at the end of it to a question and answer period that our two moderators will guide us through. And so, as I said, it's my privilege to introduce you to our moderators. We have two this year. We have Eugene Brandon and Phil Green. And I'll start with Eugene at the far end of the stage here. Dr. Eugene Brandon is a scientist working in translational medicine, and he's spent approximately 30 years in scientific research and development in both academic and industry context. Since 2005, Eugene has been a very active volunteer within the ALS Association at both the local level and the national level. And just immediately to the right of Eugene is Phil Green. And I love that Phil starts his bio with that he's a loving husband to his wife Jennifer and a dedicated father to his 4 children, Ariana, Hunter, Parker, and Whitney. In addition to that, he was diagnosed in 2018 with ALS, 4 years after doing the Ice Bucket Challenge, and he immediately dedicated himself to making a difference in the fight against this horrific disease. It would take the rest of today to list the number of organizations that Phil volunteers his time with, but we're very fortunate at the International Alliance that we're one on that list, and that he very actively volunteers on our Innovation and Technology Advisory Council, our Pals and Cows Advisory Council, and a million other things in the educational sphere around roundtables and learning and improving the ALS MND experience and community. He was privileged to be a patient fellow in 2019 at the International Symposium on ALS MND, and he's also served as a consumer reviewer for the Department of Defense ALS Research Program. He's a graduate of the University of Washington, where he was on the 1991 National Championship UW football team. I'm not a sports person, but I understand that's a huge deal. And he spent the past 25 years building a career in developing technology solutions for brands such as Sony, Hewlett-Packard, and Home Depot. I'll turn it over to Phil and Eugene. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that, Kathy. And just by coincidence, I was in Seattle in 1991 also. That's where I was in graduate school, and Phil and I have connected on that. Just a little interesting note for those of us geolocated. I know some people are remote, but located here in San Diego and at this international conference, it's interesting to note that the first Europeans landed on the west coast of North America right here on this piece of Point Loma. So that's kind of just a little tidbit of information. Maybe that was 500 years ago. I don't know the exact dates, but the Cabrillo National Monument is right here off to my left, to the west of us. And if anybody has a chance to visit up there, it's really a nice place to see San Diego and learn about the history. Just to introduce the panel today, and Phil has asked me to go ahead and introduce the panel. We are honored and delighted to have these 3 extremely accomplished panelists today. Any one of them joining us would be a special treat, but here we have the triumvirate of expertise and experience. They're all coming to us from the north, I think by coincidence, from Quebec and New Brunswick and Sweden. And they're all doctors with impressive track records, but also great trajectories leading us forward towards making ALS a livable disease. So we're very excited to welcome the 3 panelists today. Colleen O'Connell is from New Brunswick, where she is the medical director of the Stan Cassidy Center for Rehabilitation and Clinical Research and clinical research director at UNB Institute of biomedical engineering. She's a thought leader in technologies for mobility and pain and spasticity management. Angela Genge is here from Montreal. She heads the clinical research unit at the Montreal Neurological Institute, which I think is known as the Neuro. And with a staff of over 30 clinical research coordinators, they're currently running 100 trials at any given time. That's pretty amazing. She helped establish and leads the ALS Biobank Tissue Repository, and also is deeply involved with the Canadian Neuromuscular Disease Registry, the CNDR. And joining us virtually today is Caroline Ingre, who heads the ALS Center at the Karolinska University Hospital and leads ALS research at the Karolinska Institute, focusing on prognosis, imaging methods, biomarkers, psychological elements of ALS, and epidemiology of ALS. She's created the ALS Biobank in Sweden and also the Swedish National ALS Registry. So all three are leaders in the field, and they're here to provide their insights and answer questions, and I'd like us all to go ahead and welcome them. Who's going to present first? Caroline is up first. Caroline, if you have some slides and you're ready to go, we're ready.
Presentation. My name is Caroline Ingre. I'm a physician and researcher at the Karolinska Institute and University Hospital in Stockholm, Sweden. The title of my presentation is The Use of Registries to Visualize Heterogeneity and Contribute to the Pre-Screening Process for ALS Clinical Trials. So what is the ALS Registry? Well, in Sweden, we have several Swedish neuroregistries, all working from the same platform. And we have created the motor neuron, or the ALS registry, on that same platform, enabling the doctors who work with other neurological diseases, not only ALS or MND, to be familiar with the platform and so be able to register the patients quite easily. So this is the homepage. You can reach the neuroregistry from any computer, and it's easy to log in. I created this registry in 2015. It's a national registry, and all ALS teams in Sweden can log in and create new information. Not only the physicians, but the entire multidisciplinary team. And because this applies to all multidisciplinary team members, you can get a lot of information from each patient or for each patient when all the multidisciplinary team members are working together. So why did I create this registry? Well, actually, it was one day I was talking to the husband of one of my patients, and he said, well, you know, how can you follow the care and evaluate the care if you're not writing anything down? I would like to be able to see the care that you are providing. So that gave me the idea of the registry. I wanted to create ALS care. I wanted that ALS care in Sweden would be of high quality and equal. And I wanted to create some kind of platform for that. I wanted to ensure that we collaborate throughout Sweden, or maybe in Scandinavia if we are lucky, with the same registry maybe. And I also wanted to build this structure for collaboration by creating the registry. We are now also creating a national consensus on how to investigate patients and follow patients, and with treatment guidelines incorporated into the registry. And we also wanted the registry to be a tool to follow the patient care with any new specific drugs or already existing drugs. So it's an opt-out registry, which means that you inform the patient after the diagnosis. You can confirm that the patient has been informed and agrees to be in the registry, and you document it in the medical chart, but then you are in the registry. So it's an easy way to get people involved by talking about the registry at the time of diagnosis or shortly thereafter. And so what are we actually following in the registry? Well, we are following the symptom onset, date and region, specific research criteria for the diagnosis, Ellis-Scorial criteria. We also follow the staging of the disease using King staging, the date of diagnosis, the weight and BMI, the vital capacity, different treatments, also first visit to neurologist, first visit to a speech therapist, first visit to a occupational therapist, and so on. So every time that we meet the patient, which is about every 3 months, we have a minimal data set that should be administered, making it continuous registration for the patient, which later on creates a flow, which is easy visualized also for the patient. So we usually register a lot of items, but we also register quality of life items, pain, anxiety, and depression, besides the items that I told you about on the last slide. So what we further wanted to do to start a collaboration with the patient was that we created something called PER, or patient's own registration. So we wanted the patient to feel involved and to be able to express to the doctor in the doctor-patient meeting, what is my most concern right now? It also allows patients with speech difficulties, bulbar patients, to answer questions asked from me before the meeting about quality of life or a functional rating scale or pain. It allowed them time to think about their answer and then write the answer in this own registration format, because it takes a long time for them to communicate during the patient-doctor meeting. So the patient has a possibility to register, to fill out some of their own information before the meeting. Data is then imported into the registry, and when I see the patient, I open their own registration and I validate their registered information. And I also send out a reminder a couple of weeks before the meeting for the patient. If the patient doesn't have time or energy or want to fill out this, I will do it together with the patient at the meeting. So in the own registration part, they registered anxiety and depression, their medical use, which also includes if they're using any medication which is not thought of as medication, but own medication or therapies, the functional rating scale, they rate their pain, their life quality, their ability to eat and swallow, and also the weight and BMI. So what we use then is the registry to monitor the disease together with the patient. It also gives us like a trend. What is the most important part for the patient? What is happening right now, which we need to focus more on? So it's a good overview, and we can also use it as decision support. So this is a typical patient. You can see the yellow line, which is the functional rating scale, the blue line, which is the BMI and weight, the purple and brown lines, which are the anxiety and depression. We have up here it could be the health or the life quality measurements. On the left, we instead have MoCA, which is the cognitive screening, or ECAS, which is the European cognitive screening. We have the values of anxiety and depression, BMI, the percentage of weight loss. We also actually write the treatment, and we also write when is the onset of the disease and when is the diagnosis given. So you're given a very, very fast overview of the patient, and we have also added the progression ratio for the patient. So this is a patient with slow progression, so we don't have any warnings for the doctor who is treating the patient. So it's a stable patient. This instead is a patient with faster progression. So the yellow again reflects the ALS-FRS, which decreases, and the blue and the brown lines are the increasing anxiety and depression. And the blue line is the decreasing weight. And on the left-hand side, you can see the red flags now that the patient is experiencing a lot of symptoms and we need to address them. And they won't turn green until we address them. So what is next? Well, we need to establish an approach to find patients using this registry, which is already being used nationwide in Sweden. Can we use this as a pre-screening tool? And what does that mean? Well, it means that we want to identify suitable candidates for ALS clinical trial. And as you saw in the previous slides, we are already registering the most important variables for eligibility in clinical trials. So they're already in there. So we have a nationwide registry. We already have all the variables important for clinical trials. So now we need to use this quality registry to be able to find which patients are suitable for which clinical trials. And by using the registry to identify these candidates, that means that regardless of place of residence, they can participate just by entering their data in the quality care registry. That means that every patient in Sweden who gets an ALS diagnosis and accepts to be in the registry, having their disease followed by a quality care registry, which also makes their clinical care better, means that they will be eligible for clinical trials if they want to be. So the current status is that we have a lack of national guidelines on pre-screening for clinical trials, and it's a staff-bound task, and it's a bit of lacking of clear methodology. So we receive referrals for pre-screening in various formats. We receive telephone calls, we receive emails, we receive referrals from GPs, other neurologists, or other colleagues. And they all end up in our team. It's in one of my ALS research nurses' lab. She has piles of patients willing to be part of clinical trials. So what we think that using the registry will give us is traceability, a methodology, equality, and a way of standardizing this procedure. So by using the registry, we can work variable per variable. We will obtain a final pre-screening list of these potentially eligible candidates. It's traceable. If a family or a patient wants to know how we went about to find or pre-select that patient, there's a traceable, it's traceable back to when we received the information of the patient. It's robust. It's a fast feedback to why a specific patient is not eligible or not. And once we obtain this list, we go back to the treating physician and ask if we're allowed to contact the patient, and then we can contact the patient and say that you are actually, your criteria fit this clinical trial, and if you're interested, we want to book you for a screening visit. So what are our main challenges? Well, it's this GDPR, which doesn't allow us to share all the information from the patients to us. Communication, of course. And then we need all these data to be registered in the registry to be able to find it. So what we did was that we used this registry just last summer and wanting to see how many of our patients would be eligible for trials just if we use the vital capacity. And what we could see was that even in our own registry, 88% of the patients in the registry couldn't be considered for clinical trials because their vital capacity data hadn't been registered even though it had been measured. So this was a reminder for us that using the registry needs us to be very thorough by adding the adequate data that is already there from the patient into the registry so that we then can use the registry as a pre-screening tool. So what we are trying to do now is that we are joining the medical chart with the registry so that everything that is administered or collected in the medical chart will immediately be transferred to the ALS MND registry. And by doing so, we know that everything that is collected will actually end up in the registry, enabling us to use this as a pre-screening tool. So what are our take-home messages? Well, we need to have 100% of ALS or MND patients in Sweden in the registry. And how do we accomplish that? Well, we are working together with the other university hospitals in Sweden, talking about this registry and how it can increase or enhance the ALS care overall in Sweden by us doing everything the same way, evaluating our care, and also listening to the warnings of the most important variables and then applying adequate care when the warnings arise. But we are also working together to create these national consensus guidelines of how to both diagnose and manage the patients. And by doing that, we also have worked together with the trial community to address which are the most important variables to consider for then being part of clinical trials. We have incorporated them in the registry. We have talked about them in the national Swedish meetings, and we are now incorporating them in the clinical guidelines for diagnosis and care, talking about the important part of them being registered in the registries if the automatic transfer from the medical chart is not done, to be able to find the patients for each trial that we are running. So what we are trying to do in Sweden is that we want all the patients, regardless of where they live, regardless if they are connected to a big clinical trial site, to be eligible for trials if they so prefer to be part of that. That means that the patients themselves won't have to feel stressed that they are living in a small town in Sweden, that no one is thinking about their participation in trials. They don't have to be afraid that if they lose track of which trials are being run in Sweden, they won't be able to participate. So it will also ease the burden of the patients by saying that if you choose to be in this quality care registry, which firstly will enhance your clinical care management, you will also be eligible for the clinical trials that are suitable for you. It means that the patient and the families doesn't have to feel the stress about participation in clinical trials. Thank you so much for letting me present this, and I hope that this is something that we can work on in Sweden that will be nationwide in Sweden, that we can also spread to the Scandinavian countries as a first and work together with the entire Scandinavian countries. And maybe this is also something that we can apply for the rest of Europe and other parts of the world. If you're interested of contacting me, please contact me at caroline.ingrid@ki.se or my clinical trial coordinator, Juliette Foucher. Thank you so much for listening.